In the autumn of 1895, a stonecutter named August Heller descended beneath the cornerstone of the old Denver Mint, carrying a beeswax candle, a German-made iron chisel, and a leather folio of engineering diagrams that his foreman had told him never to open. The sub-foundation passage he entered had been bricked over for what the Mint's own construction logs listed as 11 years. The walls were wet. The stone floor was flat and perfectly level, not cut in the manner of the 1880s construction phase above it, but polished in a way Heller, with 22 years of professional stonecutting behind him, had never encountered in any American work. He was 61 years old. He had laid foundation stone in 4 states. He had dressed granite blocks for courthouses, prison walls, and 1 cathedral. He knew what 19th century stonework looked like. What he found on the eastern wall of that sub-foundation passage was not something the Mint's architects had put there. It was not something any architect from his era could have put there. It was already there when they built the Mint around it. The official record of the United States Mint at Denver, as maintained by the Treasury Department through 1906, states that the facility was constructed in 2 phases beginning in 1863 and finalized between 1894 and 1897, with no pre-existing structures on the site. The records do not mention August Heller by name. They do not mention the sub-foundation access passage. They do not mention the report Heller submitted to his supervising engineer, a man named Charles Devereaux, 9 days after Heller's descent into that passage. Heller was not a crank. He was not a drifter. He was a licensed journeyman stonecutter certified by the Colorado Territorial Masonry Guild, one of only 31 men in the state to hold that certification at the time. He had personally supervised the cutting and placement of the limestone blocks on the north face of the Colorado State Capitol building. He had worked dressed stone in German-speaking Switzerland before emigrating in 1871. He knew what old stone looked like. He knew what deliberate cutting looked like. He knew what pre-industrial tool marks looked like, because he had spent 4 years working alongside walls in the canton of Graubünden that were 2,000 years old. And he knew that what was carved into that eastern wall had not been put there by any hand he recognized from any tradition he had studied, European or American. Within 6 days of submitting his written report to Charles Devereaux, August Heller was dismissed from the Mint project without stated cause. Within 3 weeks, his certification with the Colorado Territorial Masonry Guild was suspended, pending an inquiry that no surviving record shows was ever completed or formally closed. His foreman, Charles Devereaux, was transferred to the Philadelphia Mint facility before the end of the calendar year. Devereaux would later apply for a federal pension in 1908. The section of his service record that should document his Denver assignment lists the entire 18-month period as a single redacted block. Blank. No reassignment memo. No performance review. Nothing. Before we go further, if investigations like this are something you find yourself coming back to, hit subscribe so the next one finds you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress this kind of research unless you specifically tell it otherwise. To understand what August Heller walked into that autumn, we have to go back not just a few years, but to a period the official history of Denver has never fully accounted for. The city that became Denver was not empty land. It was not a neutral site chosen for federal convenience. The block bounded by Colfax and Cherokee had a specific, documented history that federal authorities chose not to carry forward into their construction records. In 1860, a survey filed by the Provisional Government of Jefferson Territory noted the presence of, and I am quoting the actual survey language here, stone formations of non-natural character below the surface grade at the southeast corner of the designated block. That notation was made by a government surveyor. It was filed with the Jefferson Territory Land Office. It should have appeared by standard procedure in the 1863 federal acquisition documents when the United States purchased the site for mint construction. It did not appear. It was omitted. Whether by accident or by design, the single most significant notation in the pre-acquisition survey of that land, the presence of non-natural stone formations below grade, was removed from the chain of record before federal title transferred. The Denver of the 1890s was a boom town with a short memory and a talent for burying its own contradictions. The Colorado Gold Rush had transformed a tent city into a territorial capital in the span of a single decade. The institutions that were being built, the Capitol, the courts, the mint, were being built fast, on land that had not been fully understood before the first shovel went in. What set August Heller apart from every other tradesman on the mint project was not ambition or curiosity. It was experience. Specifically, European experience. He had spent years working in a part of the world where pre-Roman stonework was not a theoretical concept, but a physical reality encountered in ordinary construction. He had touched it. He had cut around it. He knew, in the way that a trained craftsman knows from his hands and not just his eyes, when a surface had been worked by tools he could not name. When he descended beneath that cornerstone in the autumn of 1895, he was not looking for anything unusual. His assignment was routine. Verify the drainage grade of the sub-foundation passage before the final pour. What stopped him was the texture of the eastern wall, the way his beeswax candle caught the surface at a specific angle, from directly below, that made the carved symbols visible in a way they would not have been visible from eye level. He stood there for what he later described, in a private letter, as a very long time. Then he opened the leather folio he had been told not to open, because it contained the original 1863 foundation diagrams, and he confirmed what he already suspected. The eastern wall of that passage was not on any diagram. It had not been placed there during construction. It predated the building above it, and the carvings on it were deliberate, precise, and completely unrecognized by a man who had studied stonework on 2 continents. A stonecutter named Hieronymus Beck, who had worked the same Denver Mint project 2 years prior during the 1893 structural phase, filed a sworn affidavit in 1901 with a notary in Colorado Springs. That affidavit, a 4-page handwritten document witnessed by a justice of the peace named Samuel Whitford, described a bricked-up alcove that Beck's crew had encountered during excavation of the West Drain Channel. Beck stated that when the alcove was opened, the interior wall displayed continuous carved characters running floor to ceiling, each approximately 3 inches tall, in a regular repeating pattern that no worker on site could identify. The crew foreman ordered the alcove resealed with new brick by the end of that working day. Beck stated that he personally carried 8 of the original bricks out of the alcove before it was resealed. He described them as being approximately 14 inches by 8 inches, gray, and denser than any brick material he had handled in 30 years of masonry work. Not fired clay, not sandstone, something that had no name in his professional vocabulary. Beck's affidavit exists. It is held in the archive collection of the El Paso County Clerk's Office in Colorado Springs. It is listed in their 1922 catalog under Correspondence and Sworn Statements, Box 14. As of the last independent inquiry, conducted in 2019 by a researcher named Daniel Foy, the archive folder is physically present and cataloged. The documents inside have been removed. The folder is empty. The catalog entry remains. There is a pattern here that does not belong to Denver alone. In Philadelphia in 1901, workers excavating a drainage channel beneath the original United States Mint building broke through what the project superintendent described as a pre-existing stone floor of unknown origin and unknown age. The superintendent filed an internal report. The report was reviewed by the Treasury Department. No further action was documented in any record accessible today. The excavation was redirected and the stone floor was covered over. In New Orleans in 1912, renovation workers beneath the old United States Branch Mint on Esplanade Avenue reported finding a sealed stone chamber approximately 8 feet by 12 feet, with walls bearing geometric carvings unlike any recognized Native American tradition in the region. A local newspaper, the New Orleans Item, published a 2-paragraph account on March 7th of that year. When a researcher attempted to locate the original article in the 1990s, the microfilm reel for that specific edition was listed in the archive system as damaged beyond recovery. In San Francisco, in 1906, in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, workers clearing rubble from the old Mint building on 5th and Mission reported finding a sub-basement room that did not appear on any construction plan. The room was described in one surviving account, a personal letter, not an official document, as containing stone blocks of unusual size with markings on the interior faces. That letter was published in a 1974 collection of earthquake survivor correspondence. It has not been referenced in any official history of the San Francisco Mint, not once. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern, and the pattern follows a specific institution, not a city, not a region, the United States Mint. The institutional response in every case followed the same sequence. A discovery was made. An internal report was filed, or, in some cases, an unofficial account emerged. The report was reviewed at a level above the project foreman, and within a predictable window of time, never more than a few weeks, the physical site was closed, the relevant worker was reassigned or dismissed, and the documentation entered a quiet process of erasure that never drew attention because it never announced itself. No confiscations in the night, no dramatic suppression, just paperwork that stopped being filed and certifications that quietly lapsed and archive folders that were eventually found to contain nothing. The Treasury Department has never adequately explained the gap in Charles Devereaux's Federal Service record covering his Denver assignment. It has never explained why the 1860 Jefferson Territory Survey notation about non-natural stone formations at the Mint site was omitted from federal acquisition documents. It has never explained why August Heller, a credentialed decorated professional with a spotless 22-year record, was terminated without stated cause 6 days after filing a report that no one at the Treasury Department will acknowledge receiving. It has never explained why Hieronymus Beck's affidavit folder in the El Paso County Archive contains no documents despite being listed in the catalog. Why would the Treasury Department transfer a supervising engineer mid-project to another city, leaving an 18-month blank in his service record with no documentation of why? Why would a state masonry certification be suspended with no documented inquiry and no documented resolution? Why would 4 separate Mint facility discoveries across 3 decades produce the same institutional response, silence, redirection, and the quiet disappearance of documents? Why would someone use Mint construction materials, American-made brick from the 1890s, to seal a passage below a building that the official record claims was built on vacant land? These questions do not go away because institutions refuse to answer them. Now here is what makes August Heller's account different from every other account in this pattern. He wrote it down, not in his report to Devereaux. That report is gone. But in a private letter written in German sent to his brother-in-law, a clockmaker named Wilhelm Brandt, who lived in Zurich. That letter passed through the Brandt family for 3 generations. In 1967, a Brandt descendant named Elsa Brandt Kaufmann donated a collection of family correspondence to the archive of the Deutsches Historisches Museum in Berlin. Among that correspondence was a letter dated November 12, 1895, written by August Heller, postmarked Denver, Colorado. A researcher named Marcus Webb located this letter in 2011 while conducting unrelated archival work in Berlin. He photographed it. He had it professionally translated. The letter describes, in the careful language of a trained craftsman, what Heller found on that eastern wall beneath the old Denver Mint. He describes the carvings as being in a style he had never encountered in any European stonework. He describes the depth of the cuts as requiring a precision he could not account for with any tool he personally knew. And he describes, at the bottom of the passage, something that his report to Devereaux had apparently included as well: a dressed stone threshold, approximately 4 feet wide, set into the floor of the passage, that led to a bricked-up opening. Not a wall that happened to be there, a bricked-up opening. Something that someone at some point after the original structure below was built had deliberately sealed shut using materials from above. The brick used to seal that opening, Heller wrote, was identical in manufacture to the surface brick of the Mint building overhead. American-made, 19th century. In other words, someone working during or after the Mint's construction phase had used Mint materials to seal a passage beneath the Mint. Someone who had access to the construction site. Someone who had access to the sub-foundation level. Someone who did not want that opening to be seen. For 12 years after his dismissal, August Heller attempted to be heard. He wrote to the Treasury Department in 1897. No response survives in any archive. He filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Territorial Masonry Guild in 1898, seeking the restoration of his certification. The Guild reviewed the complaint and voted not to reinstate him. The reason recorded in the Guild minutes is a single phrase: conduct unbecoming professional standards. No elaboration, no specifics, no detail of what conduct or what standard had been violated by a man who had built the north face of the Colorado State Capitol. Heller wrote to the Denver Republican newspaper in 1899. The letter was not published. His daughter, Marta Heller Schultz, later said that her father kept a copy of every letter he ever sent in a wooden box kept under his bed, and that the box was still full on the day he died. August Heller died in February of 1907 in Denver, Colorado. The official cause of death listed in the Colorado Death Registry was pneumonia. He was 73 years old. He had no documented history of respiratory illness. He had been seen at the Denver Public Library as recently as 3 weeks before his death. Asking the reference librarian for access to maps from the original 1860 Jefferson Territory survey records, he was turned away. The maps, the librarian reportedly told him, had been transferred to a federal repository and were no longer available at that branch. The wooden box was never found. Marta Heller Schultz later said it disappeared in the weeks after her father's death, when men she did not recognize came to the house and told her they were collecting documents on behalf of a federal archive. She was 19 years old. She did not ask for their names. She never saw the box again. The old Denver Mint building still stands. It is now a museum operated by the United States Mint and open to the public on East Colfax Avenue. If you visit today, you can tour the production floor, the vaulted storage rooms, and the original 1897 lobby with its decorative ironwork and polished floor. If you ask the museum staff about a sub-foundation passage on the eastern interior, they will tell you the building has no such space in its construction records. That is technically accurate. The construction records, as maintained by the Treasury Department, do not show it. But Those same records do not show August Heller either. A man who worked on that building filed a report from that building and was terminated from that building within the same 6-day window. Somewhere below the guided tour route, below the lobby floor, behind whatever the 1890s brick crew sealed with mint-issue masonry, something is still there, still carved into that wall at an angle that only catches the light from directly below, in the way that Heller's beeswax candle caught it on an autumn evening in 1895, when he was supposed to be checking the drainage grade. The official record tells us the old Denver Mint was constructed on vacant federal land according to documented plans, with no prior structures on the site. What the witnesses tell us, Heller, Beck, Devereaux's redacted file, the empty archive folder in Colorado Springs, the letter now cataloged in Berlin, is that the mint was built around something that was already there. Someone knew. Someone made a decision, and every document that might explain that decision has either disappeared or been made inaccessible in the same quiet, methodical way that suppression works when it is practiced rather than panicked. These stories survive because people refuse to stop asking. If you have made it this far, you already understand that history does not disappear when it is buried. It disappears when no one looks for it. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Next week, I am pulling a thread that connects the Denver Mint's sealed passage to a nearly identical discovery made beneath the Philadelphia Assay Office in 1888. A retired Treasury surveyor named Josiah Prentice, a map that was classified within 48 hours of submission, and the single sentence in Prentice's private diary that explains why he never spoke about it publicly. That diary resurfaced in 1994. You will not want to miss it.